What's happening? Happy hump day to you and yours. Hopefully you are having a great Wednesday. We'll get into Drake Maye in just a minute, but first, some housekeeping. Gerard Mayo announced earlier today that Jawan Bentley was going on IR. Not a shocker. He's mostly, been talked about the last week or so as far as a forgotten guy this season, right? So it's most likely he's going to miss this season, the rest of this season. He's been placed on IR. Another interesting announcement from Mayo today was the fact that Kyle Duggar has replaced Bentley as a captain. So Bentley on IR, Duggar, new captain, some housekeeping notes for you. Now let's get to Drake Maye. Jaden Daniels played excellent on Monday night. He was terrific. And I think a lot of people, as we keep track of all the rookie quarterbacks across the league, every time a rookie quarterback has a good game, it's going to make people feel like the Patriots are making a mistake by not playing Drake Maye. Why is Maye not out there? This offense hasn't been very good. Jacoby Brissett missed this play, missed that play. Drake Maye would help the offensive line. He's more athletic than Brissett. And all of these conversations continue to happen. And the conversations ramp up when you see Daniels complete all but 2 passes on a Monday night, including an absolutely ridiculous bucket throw to Terry McLaurin for a touchdown with the pocket collapsing and a hand in his face. A lot of people want Drake Maye out there right now. Gerard Mayo said earlier today that Drake Maye is still getting 30% of the reps. Brissett's getting 70%, Maye's getting 30%. So the reps have not changed that practice. That's the way it's been for the last few weeks. Brissett getting 70%, Drake Maye getting 30%. Now, what was interesting was Mayo was asked whether or not, since the Patriots are not signing a veteran quarterback to put on the practice squad or maybe try to move Milton to the practice squad, Mayo was asked if that means Maye has been practicing well enough that the Patriots don't feel like they have to go out and get a veteran quarterback. And Mayo said yes. Mayo said that Maye has practiced well enough, whereas the team feels pretty comfortable not going out and signing a veteran quarterback for that safety insurance. Now, I disagree with that. I think they should have a veteran quarterback at least on the practice squad, but Mayo says they're not going to do that. As of right now, that's not the plan, and Maye is practicing well enough for them not to want to move away from that plan. So that's the background with all of this. The ultimate question I think many of you are asking right now, is it a mistake? Is this a mistake by the Patriots not starting Maye? Should Drake Maye be out there this weekend against San Francisco? And I'm here to tell you that I am in camp, remain patient. And I know many of you are going to disagree with that. I know many of you are going to say, Maye should be starting right now. This makes no sense. Why do they continue to have him stand on the sidelines? He's the more talented quarterback, et cetera, et cetera. I am in camp, remain patient. I am not rushing to throw Maye out there for several reasons that I will share with you. And I'm sure some of you will disagree. But I have been consistent. I have been consistent from the beginning when talking about Maye and when to start him. Many people that have watched this podcast before, the regulars, right, of the Nick Cattle Show, they know what I'm going to say. There were 2 prerequisites before I'd be ready to start Drake Maye in a football game that matters. The first is whether or not Maye is ready. Is Maye himself ready to start a game? The second was I did not want the offensive line to be a 5-alarm fire. And what we're seeing right now on that offensive line is a 5-alarm fire. The second worst pressure rate in all of football belongs to the Patriots. Jacoby Brissett and Drake Maye, since Maye took some snaps against the Jets, they have faced pressure 44.8% of the time. That is just not sustainable for a quarterback to survive with. The second worst pass protecting offensive line in football is what we've witnessed through the first 3 weeks. This offensive line has been a disaster. We went in depth on Monday about what this O-line has done, what Elliott Wolf could have done, but the results are the results. This offensive line right now, when trying to protect the quarterback, is hideous. There's really many other words we could use. You can throw in some curse words as well. We can get very colorful with the language, but it has been terrible. The pass protection has been awful through the first 3 weeks. Second worst offensive line in football. Jacoby Brissett has been hit 30 times. Now, I want to put that into perspective. Brissett is on pace. He's on pace to get hit 170 times. I'm not a math major, but 3 games, 30 hits, 10 a game, 17 games, 10 times 17, 170. You go back to David Carr with the Houston Texans years ago, he was sacked like 75, 76 times. I don't know how many times he was hit that year. But when your starting quarterback is on pace to get hit 170 times, that's terrible news. That's no bueno for anybody. It's not good for the offensive line. It's not good for the quarterback. It's not good for the offense. You want to put Drake Maye behind this offensive line right now? This 5-alarm fire? Brissett getting hit 30 times? Maye last week was sacked twice and rock bottomed in the middle of the football field, and he played less than 5 minutes. On top of that, not only is your offensive line horrific right now in pass protection, not only has Brissett been hit 30 times through 3 games, but your offensive line is also banged up. We have no idea who's going to play on Sunday. I can't tell you what the starting offensive line is going to be against the 49ers. I have no clue. Is Vidarian Lowe going to play? He's been limited at practice. City So just came back to practice this week. Is So going to start? Is So going to be ready to actually play football? So you don't know about Lowe. You don't know about So. Michael Jordan has also been limited. And for the people out there that, and I get it, haven't been paying super close attention to Michael Jordan, the left guard, he's actually been very solid. He's been one of the most dependable linemen that they have had through the first 3 weeks. And now he's limited. Caden Wallace is practicing. He banged up his knee last week. Looks like he's going to go. But I have no idea how this offensive line is going to be set against the Niners. And I don't know, whoever does play, how healthy those guys are. So might play, but he might rotate. Jordan might play, but he might rotate. Lowe might play, you guessed it, but he might rotate. And you want to throw Drake Maye into the middle of all of this right now? I just disagree. I disagree. And it's not about Maye getting hurt. I've said this from the beginning. Of course, none of us want Drake Maye to get hurt. The bigger concern that I have, and I've said this since day one, I said it on 98.5 The Sports Hub, I've said it on this podcast multiple times. The biggest concern I have regarding Maye is regression. In all of the things that you've worked on, all of the progress that he's made, you throw him in, and this offensive line is a dumpster fire, and it gets him thinking too quick and processing too quick. Now he's starting to find those old bad habits. They start to creep up, and the progression becomes a regression because you threw him out there when this O-line was a disaster zone. That's the worst thing you can do. I mean, even Alex Van Pelt talked about the footwork, right? Following the Jets game last Friday, AVP brought up that the footwork for Maye, it was still spotty. There were still issues with his footwork. There were still some issues with some of the basics. And you just have to imagine that the issues with his footwork happened because of the offensive line in front of him and him trying to think very quickly on his feet while having to deal with the pressure. He saw Brissett get hit 1 billion times on Thursday night. So Maye played less than 5 minutes of football that matters, and already Van Pelt is telling us that there were some footwork issues. And if you don't want to believe Alex Van Pelt, because you might think he's just doing a solid by Brissett. Greg Bedard wrote about Drake May's stint against the Jets. Here's what Greg wrote. The same quick-to-run decisions and sloppy footwork were again present. Motion is still long. Almost threw a pick on his first attempt. Left the pocket too quick and got drilled on his second drop back. Made Kayshon Boutte's 2-yard catch harder than it needed to be. Had opportunities to pop in hasty on his first sack. Threw wide of Hooper when Boutte was a better option. Was hit as he threw to Boutte, but he was open earlier. So you start to see some of these issues creeping in, and he only played like 4.5 minutes. Now, what happens if he starts a game and in the first 5 minutes, you see the footwork regression? You see the indecisiveness. You see the rush getting after him. He starts thinking too quick. Things can go downhill rapidly. And I'm not saying that's what would happen, but from day one, it's been about making sure that things around Maye can work, at least at a decent level, to give Maye the opportunity to develop, get better as the year goes on, and by the end of the year, look like the franchise quarterback for the next 10 to 15 seasons. But you need to get the operation figured out, at least at a basic level. All right, I have a lot more to talk about with Drake Maye. Don't forget to give us that thumbs up if you're watching on YouTube. Help us beat that algorithm. It's all about engagement. So likes help. If you're watching YouTube, click that thumbs up. Takes a second of your time. Doesn't cost you anything. Throw a comment in. Do you disagree with me? Do you think the Patriots should start Drake Maye right now? Make it happen. Stop waiting. Throw him out there on the field. Baptism by fire. Or do you agree with me that right now things just aren't good enough to throw him out there into the deep end? Like, comment, subscribe. Over 4,000 subscribers. Now we're looking towards 4,500. So don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Spotify, Apple Pods, peeps. Don't forget to rate and review. Let's jump to a super chat. If you want to get to the front of the line with your question or comment, throw a super chat in there and I'll get to it. Vitalix, $20 super chat. On Daniels, I think it showed why the Patriots were happy taking Maye and that Daniels didn't really go to the middle of the field. Wondering how that will show up in playoffs, weather games, if teams take away the outside, etc. Yeah, part of the Jaden Daniels decision, Vitalix is right. Drake Maye much more comfortable throwing into the middle of the football field. The two guys who were not comfortable and their numbers were bad throwing to the middle of the field, you're talking about Jaden Daniels and Michael Penix. Those two rookie quarterbacks in college, they did not throw the football to the middle of the field often. When they did, it happened to be inaccurate, and they struggle with those types of situations. So when you're looking at this offense and what AVP does, Maye's a better fit because he does throw it in the middle of the field. He does throw it down the seam. Fits his game better. Now, of course, if they were going to draft Jaden Daniels, maybe they would have had a different offensive coordinator. I don't know. You got to hire the OC before you draft the quarterback. But from what we've seen by AVP, which we'll get to in a few minutes, he seems like he has his comfort zone, and I don't think Daniels is a great fit for Van Pelt. Now, if it's quarterback or OC, you go quarterback all the time, and you take the talent. But I do think, there are things, there's a lot of film on these guys that are going to be accumulated over the next, several weeks, couple of months, and we'll see how the young guys adjust. So I appreciate the super chat, Vitalix, very much so. All right. So when you look at Maye and you look at that short stint against the Jets, it's reasonable to say that he looked like a quarterback that needed some seasoning. Still doesn't look quite ready to be out there, the bullets flying, and dealing with that kind of stuff without regressing on his own accord. So the offensive line's a problem. There's no doubt. And I'm not comfortable playing Maye behind this offensive line right now. Number two, Maye showed that he could regress rather quickly if things are not settled around him on Thursday night against the Jets. Number three, When I talked about at the beginning of the year sitting Maye, there were plenty of reasons why you should sit Maye. The offensive line we've already talked about. Another issue that I mentioned was the wide receiver room. I want the Patriots to settle the wide receiver room. I want them to have a clear hierarchy, understanding who is the guy getting the most snaps, why is he getting the most snaps, strengths, weaknesses, all of that. And I don't think the Patriots right now have settled that wide receiver room. KJ Osborne is still getting the most snaps at the position. They're starting to give Jalen Polk more snaps. Tyquan Thornton has not been good enough, has not been able to separate at the line of scrimmage consistently, still has trouble with physicality from corners. Osborne, he's not a splash kind of guy. Osborne, to me, is a better receiver when the scheme is set, when the players around him are a little bit stronger. He's more of a scheme-wide receiver than an individual receiver who's going to make a ton of plays. And right now, you don't have the scheme necessarily, and you don't have the offensive line that will allow Osborne the time to get open and do some things. Another big part of this is Kendrick Bourne. If I'm going to play my rookie quarterback, I want my best receiver out there and healthy. Bourne is your best receiver. Pop Douglas is your best active receiver, but Kendrick Bourne is the best receiver on this roster. He can play the X, he can play the Z, he can do a bunch of things within this offense. He played for Kyle Shanahan in San Francisco. Alex Van Pelt, obviously a part of that West Coast system. And so Bourne, he should have great familiarity with this offense, with the verbiage. And Gerard Mayo said this week he's getting closer. There was a video yesterday that surfaced that showed him running a route. He looked quick. He looked fast, getting in and out of cuts. He looked comfortable. I don't know when Bourne will be back. Maybe it will be next week. Maybe it will be 2 weeks. Maybe it'll be 3 weeks. But Kendrick Bourne getting back on the field will help any quarterback this year for the Patriots because he's the best receiver on the roster. He's not a number one, but he's the best receiver on the roster. And I would be patient waiting for Bourne to come back and make sure he's ready to go. Another issue that I brought up before the season began, because everybody talked about Drake Maye and the offensive line. It went beyond that. It was the offensive line. It was Maye's progression versus regression. It was the wide receiver room, but it was also Alex Van Pelt. Van Pelt had not called plays week in, week out at the NFL level for 15 years. And I wanted to make sure that Van Pelt had figured out his football team, had found some kind of rhythm in play calling before I throw the rookie quarterback out there. I need to trust Van Pelt as much as I can possibly trust him, given what he has to work with before Maye's out there. And I don't think Alex Van Pelt has figured out play calling just yet. I don't think he's comfortable. We thought they had an identity through the first 2 weeks. Then week 3, what happened? Week 3 was a disaster from Van Pelt. We went through it. On Friday, you can check out the pod recapping the Jets game. Van Pelt did not do a good job on Thursday night. The plan was a mess. It was opposite night. What they should have done, they didn't do. What they should not have done, they did. I don't think Van Pelt is at that place right now as an OC for me to trust him to do right by Maye. And going beyond week 3, we could talk about just the ins and outs of football. Greg Bedard wrote about Van Pelt this week. My buddy Greg wrote, Van Pelt has not been up to the task. There's no cohesion to what he's doing. He's just picking plays off a sheet with little thought to what they're building to. On the practice field all summer, we saw the Patriots repping wide zone runs and play action boots off it, and Van Pelt has said they want to be the best screen team in the league. That was going to be the bread and butter of this offense. However, AVP doesn't know how he wants to play and doesn't set it up correctly. So Bedard's saying Van Pelt is just picking plays. He's not setting plays up. He's not walking into a game with a clear idea as to what they want to do and why they want to do it. Greg charts a bunch of plays during the Jets game to show this. On the first 3 plays against the Jets basically had to defend a 10-yard box. And if you did that, you shut down the offense. The Jets coaches were basically saying these guys aren't running these outside plays, so if it looks like it's going away, you just run up the field and smash the quarterback. You can't run the play action passes without the runs. Bedard writes, there's no scheme production at all. The coordinator has to help them a little bit. Right now, Van Pelt isn't doing that. Now, this also affects the offensive line. The play calling impacts the offensive line. The offensive line is not struggling in pass protection because of Van Pelt. Let's get that out of the way. But Van Pelt could help the offensive line. Van Pelt could help the pass protection. Bedard writes, the pressure rate was 51% against the Jets, but I do think Van Pelt is partially to blame. 1 sack, 2 hits, 2 hurries were put on the team because the Jets were just ready for what was being called. That's Van Pelt being beaten. So you already have questions at offensive line. You already have injuries on the offensive line. And your offensive coordinator is not doing a good enough job of coordinating the offense to help the offensive line. On top of that, the offensive coordinator is just calling plays and is not really setting anything up. And if that doesn't sell you just yet, Gerard Mayo was on the Greg Hill show this week. Do you know what Gerard Mayo said? He said this publicly. He said this on the radio. Mayo said, quote, we're still trying to figure this thing out as a coaching staff, as players. Let me ask you this. Drake Maye, future of the franchise. The most important decision made by Elliott Wolf this past offseason. If you hit on Maye, the rebuild goes a lot faster. If you miss on Maye, you are restarting that rebuild. Let me ask you this. Are you comfortable throwing the future of the franchise out there on the field in a game that matters when the head coach publicly tells us that they're still trying to figure things out? The coaching staff is still trying to figure things out. The players are still trying to figure things out. Does that make you feel comfortable? I mean, are you sold on this idea? Put everything that I've talked about in totality into one big ball. And you're telling me that the Patriots should start Drake Maye with the second worst offensive line in football, with the wide receiver room still being juggled without your best wide receiver on the field just yet, with an offensive coordinator who is still trying to figure out how to call plays and how to help that offensive line. And when your head coach comes out publicly and says, we're still trying to figure this damn thing out, does that sound like an opportune time to throw Drake Maye out there? It doesn't to me. Maybe it does to you. They have not. The Patriots, before this season began and we went through the checklist, right? We went through the checklist, the boxes that needed to be checked for Drake Maye to start a game. The Patriots literally have not checked a single box on that list since we last discussed when to start Maye. I'm not talking about they still got to check a box or two. They still have not checked a single box on the list. Offensive line ain't checked. Wide receiver ain't checked. Offensive coordinator ain't checked. Overall operation is not checked. You got to start checking some boxes before I feel comfortable putting Drake Maye on a football field in a game that matters. You better start checking them boxes. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. That's how you help this show out. Takes a second of your time. Doesn't cost you any money. Like, throw a comment in, subscribe. You can do those things. You can do all those things on demand as well. Spotify, Apple Pods, rate and review. So when should Drake Maye start a football game? I'll answer that question in a minute. But first, let me jump to a $5 super chat from Wiley5. Really don't understand why Baker hasn't played. Can't think of a good reason based on what we've seen so far. I'm going to get a little bit more into this on Friday, previewing the Niners game, but I generally agree with you. Wiley, I agree with you. I mean, Osborne and Thornton out there, they're not doing anything. And I know Baker. Baker dropped a bunch of footballs in the preseason. He did not have a great camp consistently. He had way too many ups and downs. The off-the-field stuff has been irritating and I think has frustrated the coaching staff. But at this point, I would be throwing Javon Baker out there at least for a few snaps to see if he could do something. We know what Tyquan Thornton is. We've seen this movie before. He's not getting open any more than he's gotten open in the past. At least he's healthy. I'll give him that. But we know what Thornton is, and I think we know what KJ Osborne is. So I would be looking at Kayshon Boutte, Javon Baker, and Jalen Polk and trying to get those guys on the field to get them a little bit seasoned before Kendrick Bourne gets back, because when Bourne gets back, snaps are going to be even tougher to come by, especially if you're rolling out with 12 personnel, your 2 tight end packages. If you're rolling out the 2 tight ends, the opportunity for the receivers in this offense, they lessen. So I know Baker wasn't great in the preseason. I know he wasn't great in camp, but he's on the team. He's on the active roster, and he has shown flashes. So I'd at least give him a couple of chances, a couple of more chances than he's received, and see if he can be a little bit of a spark to the offense. I don't think he's going to be this great problem solver, but it's not like Thornton and Osborne are lighting the world on fire. Thank you for the super chat, Wiley. All right, so when do you start Drake Maye? You asked me, Nick, when would you start Drake Maye? My first question is, and we don't know this. I mean, Gerard Mayo somewhat hinted towards it today, but of course, Mayo says a lot. Although I will give Mayo some credit. I think he's gotten better with the media since the beginning of the season. He is saying less, and he's not, finding himself diving down rabbit holes. But does Drake Maye have a full understanding of the offense? Is he showing a full command at the line of scrimmage? I mean, if you watch Jaden Daniels on Monday night, that's a rookie quarterback who is very, very comfortable. He's making adjustments at the line of scrimmage. He seems to be on the exact same page as Cliff Kingsbury. That seems to be working. We don't know if that's the case with Maye because we haven't seen him play more than the 4.5 minutes or so against the Jets on Thursday night, and that was a little bit of a mess. So what is Drake Maye looking like at practice? We don't know. I would guess that if Maye was going bananas, if he was going ham at practice, he'd be starting. So, does he have a full understanding of the offense? Is he showing command at the line of scrimmage? The second thing, before I start Maye, I want to know, is the offensive line not an all-out disaster? They don't have to be great, but they have to be better than what we've seen through the first 3 weeks. They cannot be giving up 45% pressure rates through 3-week stretches. Has the offensive line fixed itself at least a little bit? Are they healthier than they were to start the season? Do they have the position somewhat settled? When we talked about this on Monday, I said, can you roll out? Can you roll out at one point? Can you roll out Vidarian Lowe at left tackle, the best of the Robinson, Jordan trio at left guard, Andrews at center, Owenu at right guard, Caden Wallace at right tackle? If you can get to that offensive line by week 6 or 7, if you can get to Vidarian Lowe and he stays healthy, he gets more reps under his belt. If you can get to Lowe and whoever plays better, Robinson, Jordan, that guy at left guard, Andrews at center, slide Owenu back to his natural position at right guard, and Caden Wallace can play right tackle. Now you might have an offensive line that is not a 5-alarm fire, but they've got to stay healthy. They've got to stay healthy to see if that line can be good enough to look like an NFL offensive line. The mixing, matching, injuries, rotations, shuffling, it's not helping matters. So can they get healthy And can they get the offensive line out there? Don't forget, the offensive line for about 10 to 11 straight practices during camp and during the preseason games, the Patriots told us who their starting offensive line was going to be. It was Lowe, So, Andrews, Owenu, and who am I missing? Chooks. So Chooks is gone. So you replace Chooks with Wallace. So, if that doesn't work, then you could keep Owenu at right tackle, even though he's been, no great shakes there. Week 2 was a terrible week. Last week was not a great week, but I guess a better week from what I read and all the people that break down the offensive line film. Owenu was maybe a little bit better than I thought he was last week. But can you get to that? Can you get to Vidarian Lowe, City So, Robinson, Jordan, Andrews, Owenu, Wallace? And if Wallace ain't working, Owenu at right tackle, Robinson at right guard, or So at right guard, and Robinson on the other side at left guard. Two of your 3 guards, So, Robinson, Jordan, 2 of those guys can start if you have to play Owenu at right tackle. But can you get some semblance of continuity, some semblance of chemistry, some semblance of consistency on the offensive line? That's not going to solve all the problems. It's not like they have an all-world left tackle. Trust me, I understand. But they would be better if they could get healthier and get continuity. That inherently helps an offensive line. Can they get to that? Does Alex Van Pelt have an identity set with this offense? Or is he still looking like he's just calling plays? Is he setting certain things up? Do we see a progression in growth from Van Pelt? Let's not forget, when we talked about this staff, Mayo and Covington and Van Pelt hadn't called an offense in 15 years, week in, week out. Covington had not called an NFL defense. Mayo, first-time head coach. And we said this, the beginning of the season. This is not hindsight. It's not revisionist history. We talked about it before the year began. Expect growing pains. And what we see are some growing pains. The question is, does it get better over time? Does Van Pelt figure out certain things over the next couple of weeks? And by week 6 or 7, now he's setting plays up. Now he fully understands. Now he fully understands the identity of the team in the strong points of his play sheet. Van Pelt needs to get an identity, and he needs to find a comfort level in play calling, because then he could help out the offensive line. He could figure some things out. It doesn't have to be perfect. For Drake Maye to start, it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be black or white, and some people treat it that way. Just because I'm telling you right now that I would not start Drake Maye, it doesn't mean that I need everything to be perfect on the field. But I certainly need it to be better than it's been. Like, I don't need the offensive line to be a top 10 offensive line in football. But what I can't have is the offensive line be the second worst offensive line in football in pass protection. I don't need Alex Van Pelt to be the best play caller in the world. I don't need him to be, a Sean McVay. What I need him to be is at least an okay play caller with an identity, setting up plays and looking like he is comfortable with the job. I don't need the best wide receiver core in football to have Maye play a football game or start a football game. But what I do need is Kendrick Bourne back, Jalen Polk more comfortable, and maybe Baker or Booty out there playing some football games, getting some snaps, and giving this team a little bit of a spark. I don't need it to be perfect. Maye does not need perfection around him. But what he needs is for things around him to be much better than they've been through the first 3 weeks. I'd be eyeing week 9 at Tennessee. And I said that on 98.5 weeks ago. I was open to the idea of him playing week 5 against Miami if things went right. But I don't think this team is ready to start Maye. And I think we need to start looking towards the middle of the year versus week 5, week 4. I think this is more of a possible week 8, week 9 thing than next week against Miami. But we need to see those things for me to be comfortable. I need to see the corrections. I need to see the improvement. I need to see some guys a little bit healthier than they are right now. Don't need it perfect, but I need it to be much better, including Van Pelt. The worst thing the Patriots can do is start Drake Maye because of outside factors. The worst thing that the Patriots can do as a franchise is to start Drake Maye because the radio wants him to start Drake Maye, or I want them to start Drake Maye, or fans want them to start Drake Maye. You cannot allow the outside noise to make the decision for you. You can't do that. You've got to do what's right by the player, by the football team. You can't start Drake Maye because Jaden Daniels goes bananas on a Monday night against Cincinnati. That has no impact on Drake Maye. Different people, different quarterbacks, different circumstances, different everything. You cannot be swayed by a couple of rookies having good weeks. You have to stick to the plan and see how Drake Maye looks at practice. What's he doing with his 30% of reps? What's he doing when he runs the scout team? You have to see if you can figure out this offensive line and get them better and get them healthier. What Jaden Daniels does doesn't matter. Or Caleb Williams or Bo Nix or any of those guys. If Cousins gets hurt and Penix goes out there and throws for 400 yards, I don't care. Because they're playing with different talent. They're playing with different coaches. They're at different stages of their maturation as a quarterback. That should have no impact on what the Patriots do with Maye. What should have impact is what's happening in the building and what's happening with this specific team on the field and with the coaching staff. That's what should impact Drake Maye. That's when we should know when he starts. Not because somebody down in the Capitol is off to a good start. Jump to a $10 super chat from Nelson. Hey, Nick, love the show. Do you think Mayo is being too cautious, and that's why he's not playing the young wide receivers over veteran wide receivers? Well, Jalen Polk is getting more snaps, so that's good. So they are playing Polk, and they've been playing Polk more as the season's gone on. So I think they have trust in Jalen Polk. They believe in him, and I would be surprised if that doesn't continue to be the case. Javon Baker, I think, really hurt his chances two ways. His camp was so up and down, and mostly down the last 2 or 3 weeks. He was dropping footballs. I mean, I was out at practice. He was dropping passes at practice. And we're not talking about one-on-ones and stuff. We're not talking about actual competitive snaps against cornerbacks. We're talking about drills. So he wasn't showing consistent hands. That was an issue his last year in college, right? He dropped a lot of football. So I think the quarterbacks have to trust him. And he was having that mostly downturn in his camp when they broke camp, which isn't what you want. You want to be going this way and not that way, right? That way. The other thing is the off-the-field stuff. I think Javon shot himself in the foot. Remember what Gerard Mayo said, when Baker was drafted, and he goes out there, he does the Instagram video, and he's doing these interviews and talking about he makes people in wheelchairs stand up and all that. And remember what Mayo said. Mayo said, hey, look, I'm fine with him talking, but if you're going to talk, you got to back it up. And so with all that talking before even stepping foot on the field, and then having the type of camp that he had, and then the video on social media about what happened at Logan Airport and all that stuff. And I just think he really hurt himself on the field and off the field. But he was active last week, which tells me they trust him enough to make him active. And if he's going to be active, I would play him more snaps. I would play him some snaps over KJ Osborne to see if he can give you a little bit of a spark. And if he doesn't, then he doesn't. But the lack of production from the wide receiver position right now, they should be open to all ideas. I'd be playing Booty. I'd be playing Baker. I'd be seeing if those guys can bring something to the table. But I do think this is not a situation of, the coaches and the team being cautious. I think it's a case of Baker not making the argument for himself. He's got to make that argument. This is why you should play me. I'm catching footballs. I'm making plays at practice. I'm making plays in the preseason. I'm not going on social media and being a distraction. I'm fully focused on football. But he's done enough to be on the active roster. So if he's on the active roster, give him a chance. Don't forget to like. Thumbs up means everything to the algorithm. Slap it in the face. Like, comment, subscribe. My friends at Spotify, Apple Pods, rate and review. You can also throw a comment in as well. But if you're at Spotify, Apple Pods, nothing wrong with matriculating on over to the YouTube channel and giving this podcast a like, throwing a comment in, because that's how you beat the YouTube algorithm. I wish I didn't have to ask for it, but that's the way it goes. Them's the breaks, folks. I appreciate every single one of you for supporting this podcast in any way that you do. Coming up tomorrow night, Crafts and Kickoffs, my NFL podcast. I'm going to have a beverage here tomorrow night, 7 o'clock Eastern. We'll talk about 5 of the top storylines in the NFL as we get ready for week 4. And then on Friday, we will have a preview. I've been digging into the Niners the last couple days. We will have a thorough preview, some of the keys to watch out for Sunday. We'll do that on Friday. We'll get you ready for Niners Patriots on Friday at 3 o'clock on this YouTube channel. Thanks to all of you. Have a great rest of your hump day. Have a great hump night. And I'll talk to you tomorrow night. Crafts and Kickoffs, 7 p.m.